Good afternoon. Thank you for coming back. We're going to have a wonderful afternoon. We'll begin with my introduction of Toni Cook Bush. Standing before you is a woman of enormous intellect, drive, vision, and accomplishment. By the way, she is a typical Episcopalian. Notable devotion and irregular attendance. Toni Dibble Cook Bush has played an influential role in U.S. telecommunications and media law for over 35 years.
You didn't have to say that.
Stop it. She has helped shape the regulatory landscape around critical wireless, satellite, cable, and media industries. She is now president of JAD Capital, having just over a year ago left as executive vice president and global head of government affairs for News Corporation. Before that, in private practice, she led the communications law group at Skadden Arps. A graduate of Wellesley and Northwestern's Law School, she has served as a trustee of Arena Stage and the Children's Television Workshop, the entity that gave us Sesame Street. Today, she serves on several boards, including the Children's National Hospital, the Economic Club of Washington, and my brother's keeper advisory board of the Obama Foundation. She has for many years chaired the board of the HistoryMakers. Lastly, she is the wife of former U.S. Ambassador to Morocco, Dwight Bush Sr., the mother of Dwight Jr. and Jackie Bush, and for almost all of the last 30-plus years, she has been like my sister. She is here to set the stage for the virtual appearance of the brilliant and innovative Julieanna Richardson.
Thank you, Riley, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. I am blushing, and he didn't have to say an indication of how old I might be. But I would be remiss if I didn't take a minute to recognize Riley, my friend, advisor, and constant source of inspiration. As a young lawyer in D.C., Riley took me under his wing and emphasized the importance of giving back to the community, which is why I have served on all those boards, starting with Arena Stage, which Riley encouraged me to join. Riley leads by example, and that is evidenced by his work with the African American Episcopal Historical Society. It is an honor to be here today representing the board of directors of the HistoryMakers. Julieanna Richardson is sorry that she can't be here, but unfortunately she has to attend a funeral in California. Julieanna is an inspired visionary whose impact on our society and, importantly, American history will not be fully realized in our lifetime. There's an African proverb, until the lion tells the story, the hunter will always be the hero. The importance of that proverb is amplified today as we watch leaders in some states rewriting history and, shockingly, even removing books. Julieanna and the African American Episcopal Historical Society are our alliance. For the work, both the HistoryMakers and AAEHC, we are eternally grateful. Julieanna is a graduate of Brandeis University and Harvard Law School. Julieanna left the corporate law world for the cable industry, ultimately starting her own production company and running 3 cable channels in Chicago. When Julieanna started the HistoryMakers in 2000, she was following her passion for both history and storytelling. She realized there was a huge void in the American story, the first-person voice of African Americans. Before the creation of the HistoryMakers archives, we only had the WPA audio interviews with former slaves from the 1930s. It's been a long road with many twists and turns, but Julieanna's grit, determination, and belief in the importance of the HistoryMakers archive enabled the organization to survive many doubters and the financial downturn of 2008. Under Julieanna's firm hand, the HistoryMakers has built a collection of over 3,500 first-person interviews that are available online, via the Library of Congress, and in over 200 colleges, universities, public libraries around the United States. Importantly, academics across the United States are using the archive in their classes to create new curriculum. During COVID, we saw a dramatic increase in the uses of the collection. The need for quality online content was never more apparent than when we were all shuttered in our homes for months on end. One anecdote I'd like to share is a story of a set of grandparents who could not visit their grandchildren, but they had weekly Zoom calls with their grandchildren, and every week they selected a different person from the HistoryMakers archive. They both watched the video, and then they would discuss it on their weekly call. This would not have been possible without Julieanna's leadership and the fact that she had the courage to follow her dream. I want to thank the African American Episcopal Historical Society for honoring my dear friend and hero, Julieanna Richardson. And with that, we'll see 2 videos. Thank you.
Tony, thank you. As a HistoryMakers board chair, you have helped guide this organization and its growth. My heart thanks you. Now that was a strong statement. No one can tell me and my people do not have value. No one. It is a strong statement for these historically complicated times and for the work that the HistoryMakers and the AAEHC are doing. I hope that we can work together as we were formed as initiatives literally at the same time, within years of each other. I hope that today I can encourage you to go further, deeper, since time is not on our side. I first need to do a shout out to our HistoryMaker, fellow recovering lawyer and AAEHC's collection growth specialist, Riley Temple. While I cannot be there in person, I am very, very much there in spirit. The spirit of resistance, hope, and remembering. I will return for an in-person meeting. I literally love archives. But today, for my keynote, we are what we call centering Blackness and bearing witness for this 20th anniversary symposium. In preparation for today, I looked at your growing archival holdings, and I saw the wonderful overlap in our collections. Of course, there is the WPA Alan Rowan-Cricht, who we interviewed in Boston's Back Bay when he was 91 years old, and his paintings had taken a different turn and were centered around Boston's combat zone. Your interview of him was done in 1977, 24 years before ours when he was 67 years old. And you actually have in your collection not only 2 oral history interviews, but you have an extensive art collection. I remember his interview like it was yesterday. He said he loved all colors, all foods, all seasons, except for winter. It was really cold in his apartment that day. We interviewed him. But it was exciting to see that also that you have church collections like Chicago's St. Edmunds and Washington, D.C., St. George's and St. Luke's and the Church of Atonement, Syracuse, St. Philip's, and Alabama, St. Mark's. Then there is Bishop John Burgess, who we traveled to Martha's Vineyard to interview. He was literally suffering from, he was in hospice, and we interviewed him just a week before he passed. And then there's Michael Powell. And then there are others in the audience that we would like to interview, like Reverend Gail Harris and Alfred Moss. At the HistoryMakers, oral history, digitization, and technology are central to our work. Let's take a look. See what happens when technology meets innovation and great storytellings. Now, how did we get here? I want to tell you a little bit about my story. Here I am as a little Black girl. I was born in a steel mining town of Duquesne, Pennsylvania, where men worked in the mines and life was hard. My granddad would come home with this Black lunchbox filled with soot. His fingers were gnarled and showed the hardness of mill life. We then moved to a small town in Ohio called Newark, Ohio, where there were 1,000 Blacks out of 50,000 whites, and I was the only Black kid in my class. Now, there were only two things that we studied about Black people back then. It was George Washington Carver and his peanuts. And my teacher would say, you know, he could do all these things with peanuts. And then there was the taboo subject of slavery. And for my 9-year-old brain, those two facts did not compute. You know how that is. Then one day, our teacher asked us to talk about our family backgrounds. My classmates' hands shot up like arrows to the sky. I mean, they were part German, part French, part Italian, part Polish, Jewish. What was I? I was literally cowering in the corner. I said something like part Negro. It was before James Brown, I'm Black and I'm proud. Cherokee, because most Black people think they have Native American in them. You know what I'm saying in the audience. And I added in French because I didn't want to be left out. And my father was stationed there during the war. I lied. And I knew I had lied. And I thought my teacher knew I had lied. And that feeling of not knowing and not having a legacy to call my own stayed with me until my sophomore year at Brandeis, when I was doing research on the Harlem Renaissance in New York Schomburg's library. I was listening to the song I'm Just Wild About Harry from the 1921 production of Shuffle Along. It's like a eureka moment. That song that I associated with a white president, Harry Truman, was written by a Black songwriting team of Noble Sissle and U.B. Blake and a Black play. Then, with tape recorder in hand, I interviewed Gone with the Wind's Butterfly McQueen, tap dancer Honey Coles, historian John Henrik Clark, 99-year-old Lee Whipper, the first Black member of Actors Equity. One interview informed the other. You know that here, those in your audience, in the audience today who are doing oral history research and interviews. My senior year, I would return to do Harlem Renaissance poet rioter Langston Hughes. I could not articulate it at the time, but I did not want to have any child to feel the way that I felt that day in that classroom, especially when I had a history as rich and complex as theirs. Consciously or unconsciously, the HistoryMakers was born out of that desire. It's those conscious decisions that actually has brought the AAEHC to where I was. Wanted to leave a legacy. I was in my mid-40s without children and starting to think about what was going to be my leave behind. How was I going to make society a better place? I took my theatrical training from Interlochen Arts Academy and Brandeis University, my degree in American Studies, my legal training from Harvard Law School, and the support of those who dared to believe in my vision to build a bridge as we crossed it. It has been a marvelous 23-year journey. You know that also here. It hasn't been without its ups and downs. You're discovering history as we're discovering it. And I literally rejoice in 2023, your 20th anniversary, that even in these trying times of racial and social unrest and the attacks on the teaching of Black history, that what began at my dining room table is now more relevant than ever before. I want you to see our progress. We are now the nation's digital repository for the Black experience, and we have accomplished what few have thought possible. As you know, we're a 501c3. We're the nation's largest collection of African American video oral history interviews. This is where we're housed at the Library of Congress in Culpeper, Virginia. That facility was built with the largest gift to date to the federal government of $163 million by a man named David Packard of Hewlett and Packard, and we're piped by 75 miles of fiber optic downtown. Our goal is to fill in the gap of our understanding of African American history. We understand that. We define a history maker one of two ways: someone who's made significant accomplishments in his or her own life, and someone who's associated with a particular movement, organization, event, or time. We have thousands and thousands and thousands of subjects, whether it's the makings of modern music, entrepreneurship, Black feminists, financial literacy. We also have 15 different subject categories. You see from fashion and beauty to the left to civic makers, with our religious category there really still needing more assistance. So we see the work that you're doing at AAHC, EC, as important to that. On the left represents have money, have no money kind of chart. But if you look at our numbers, the earliest recollection, the collection, meaning someone's memory, goes back to the 1700s. We've done interviews in 451 cities and towns. The youngest person at the time of interview was 28, Aisha McMillan, a prima ballerina. The oldest was 109, Louisiana Hines, a World War II Rosie the Riveter. We have more men than women, and that in that way we still are we still resemble also your collection, that we need to more diversify the collection with women's voices. 70 and above represents 2/3 of the collection. It's the part of the collection that I focus on because that's the 20th century. And we all have to work really hard so we don't lose the 20th century. If you look at this slide, the gray represents where we have not done interviews or haven't been present there to do interviews, or have done less than 9. By 2025, we will have reached all states in the United States. But look for where your state is located and see whether you think you can be helpful to us or that we can work together in some way. We have now 200 subscribing institutions to our digital archive. We're really proud of that. We'd love it if the Episcopal Church would also become one of our subscribing institutions, and then we can sort of co-create together. In doing this work, I've started to see the society places higher value on those who have documentary evidence of their of their contributions. If we're the Rockefellers, the Fords, the Whitneys, no one's gonna ask us whether we have value. But I want to give you some examples because that's what I do. I go around and look at archives. So at WashU, when I went to talk to the archivist there, she was embarrassed. She said they didn't have much, but then it was a light bulb went off in her head, and she said they had the largest collection of Black Sambo. At the University of Virginia, they have 2 sections on how to properly apply blackface. I want to give you this example or ask this question. The Army Heritage Center, they have $25 million for digitization. We all would hope for $25 million for digitization. And they have 2 football fields of content. They control all the military museums in this country in terms of content. How many Black people do they have in their collection? It's the 2 that you see there. They only had 1. That was Benjamin O. Davis Sr., and then we got them Togo West. We all can work and do better. But I'm just giving some examples because time is really running out, and that's the urgency of the work that we're doing together. Less than 1% of our HistoryMakers have repositories for their collection. So this is something that I think about and why I think the uniqueness of the work you're doing the oral histories and you're also looking as a repository for those collections. So Angela Davis, we were able to get into the Schlesinger Library. Jesse Norman, we were able to get into the Library of Congress. And Tom Burrell, after hearing us talk at Martha's Vineyard, he took himself to Duke. He was the only person in their collection about advertising, and he's the only Black person in that collection. I don't want what to happen with Maya Angelou, because when she passed away, everything was put up for auction. People were coming through our house as a estate sale, as it was a garage sale, and there were handwritten manuscripts. We in the Black community have to understand and believe that there's value. We who associate with the Black community have to understand that if we don't take this seriously, no one will, and hence the urgency. Our solution is preserving 20th century African American history with 21st century solutions. And we've created a digital library using AI and machine and assisted learning. And this is something that I'm hoping that we can talk to together and we can show you our work and we can share practices, processes, procedures, all oriented towards making everything a better place, a better society, a better way, and diversifying the experience. At the HistoryMakers, we've always focused on technology. And for those of you who have not seen our digital archive, here it is. It differs from our website. Thanks to modern day technology, users can access it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on their laptops, computers, and phones. Let's take a look. When we type in Episcopal, literally 1,838 stories come up. I want to show you some of the stories that we found.
Did you go to church when you were a child?
Yes, we went to St. Philip's Church.
And when you moved to Connecticut, did you continue, were you involved in church?
No. My mother was divorced. The Episcopal Church did not accept women. Now, the minister of the Episcopal Church asked my mother to do anything, he would do anything for her that she wanted. He would give her anything she wanted. But we were not allowed to go to the church. And of course, my mother was aghast. She was furious.
We went to St. Luke's Episcopal Church. While my parents were at St. Augustine, one of my father's fraternity brothers, William Bancroft, became an Episcopal minister and came to St. Luke's Episcopal Church. That may have been why we went to St. Luke's as children, and perhaps we had been baptized at Calvary, which my father's mother had been a member of. But St. Luke's Episcopal Church was Alexander Crummel's church. It's a national historic marker. It's one of the, if not the oldest black Episcopal church in the country.
You know, Crummell at one time was supposed to, he had a reputation of being the most erudite
Yes.
black man in the country.
Yes, yes.
And the only person that Du Bois would look across to. The
Yes,
black,
yes, indeed,
you know,
indeed.
So Crummell was
So
quite a
this
figure.
talented tent. So being in St. Luke's with its tremendous history, and I think just prior to Father Vancroft taking leadership of the church, the minister there, Bishop Brown, was sent to Liberia.
And in terms of, now did you all attend the Episcopal church in Danville?
No, and we started when I was little, like 4 or 5. And we went to about 2 or 3 services. And then the priest got my mother aside and said that some of the parishioners had objected to drinking out of the same chalice for communion with us, and because we were the only black family. And he would be willing to give us communion with a separate chalice.
But equal though.
Yeah, and my mother said that was unacceptable. And so I started going to the Baptist church, and then we went to the Methodist church. I joined the Methodist children's choir called the Angel Choir. And then I went to St. Patrick's and took Catholic instruction. And I really didn't come back to the Episcopal church.
I'm an Episcopalian and have been one since I was a little kid. My wife's an Episcopalian, and we belong to a church in Austin called St. James Episcopal Church, which is has a very interesting background, because this was a black church that has become now predominantly white. And you usually have the opposite. The white church becomes black. So it's a really fascinating church that's set up as an example for the whole world. And we got the interesting thing there, we have a lot of black folks that are concerned about it becoming so white, and we got some white folks that are concerned about being so white. But we've got a commitment all the way down the line that we're going to keep that African American heritage. So I got involved. I was senior warden at one time. I was involved in the diocese. I was elected to the executive board of the Diocese of Texas and served in that for a 3-year term. And our church is growing fantastically. We're building a new church right as we speak. And now our concern is that our rector is being interviewed for bishop's jobs all over the country, so we're probably going to lose him.
Friends of ours who were working on integrated housing construction in the city of Waterbury, and who lived not too far away, stopped by the house one afternoon. This man, white couple, Marty and Reed Smith, and they suggested that they would like us to attend church with them sometime because we like you and you appear to like us, and we spend time together, and we're doing some interesting things at church. And we'd like you to attend. So I looked at my wife and she said, why not? So we attended in service, and after the service, during the coffee hour, we learned that the young couples there were interested in the same things we were. An integrated society, a better society. They changed from a manufacturing town to a more intelligent community. And they made us feel so welcome. In fact, they had an outreach program to recruit minorities because they wanted the church to reflect the community. And so since they were involved in the same things that we were involved in and wanted to improve the community, and moved from a blue-collar or factory-oriented town, that we decided we liked the atmosphere. Once I was in the Episcopal Church and became a member of the governing board of that particular church, St. John's in Waterbury, Connecticut. Later, subsequently in my life, as state treasurer of the state of Connecticut, the Bishop of Connecticut felt that I should be a representative at the general four-year convention of the Episcopal Church because he felt that I would have something to offer. And that was a delightful experience because we were in the beginning of the Episcopal Church looking upon the idea of ordaining women as priests. And although it requires 16 years to accomplish that, obviously I was in the forefront of that because my philosophy has always been that we should have an equal society, male and female, black, white, Hispanic, Jews, Christian, whatever, that there should be equal. So obviously, after the first convention, I attended the second convention 4 years later and became recognized, and I was elected to the church pension board, handling all of the retirement funds of the Episcopal priests and staff people, and ultimately spent 6 years on the executive council, the management group of the entire Episcopal Church in this country. So it was an interesting experience in life for me.
We have thousands of stories in the collection about the Episcopal Church and Black people's role in that church, from its leadership in the congregation. Think about it. We owe this, our work, to the Black community at a time when our very history is under attack. Consider this. There are anti-CRT laws that have been passed by 18 states. These stories are rich and complex and should not be hidden from view. They are our mutual legacy. As I said earlier, I don't want any child to feel the way that I felt that day in that classroom when I did not have a legacy to call my own. HEC has a special role to play. We have a special role to play. But your leadership literally represents the nation's Black leadership. And the African American Episcopal Historical Collection has the richness of the Black experience at its fingertips. It's the richness of those stories, the depth of those stories, the contextual nature of those stories, and the documentation of people's lived experience that represent the redemption of a people, the racial reckoning at a time of great need. And with all of our work, this history that we're uncovering, this world can be a better place for us all. From my heart to your ears, let freedom ring. Thank you. And together, we can really make this world a better place. God bless you.
Summation of the HistoryMakers. And I try to mimic the HistoryMakers every day. Now, yesterday, I was talking with Julieanna on the phone, and she started wagging her finger at me. She said, "Now, Riley," she said, "you're using Zoom. That is not acceptable. You cannot do that. Don't ever do that again. You have money. Your school has money. Get off Zoom." And I said, "All right, Julieanna, all right." And I thought I was, in the forefront, the vanguard. Tony has agreed to take some questions before we take a break for the next panel. Are there questions that we can ask? You want to come up? Robert?
I was fascinated when I looked at the chart of the subject matter in the collection. And 3.3% of the subject matter was religious. Given how critical the black church has been to the black community, I was just sort of confused by that. So could you comment about that?
I can't. But what I suspect, and I'm happy to look into it and get back to you, Robert, what I suspect is, one of the more challenging aspects of creating a digital archive is coming up with the right search terms that will bring everything up. And it might be a matter of, and we found that it's something that we are constantly upgrading and evolving over time.
So it's nomenclature.
Right.
Gary?
To what extent has... Can you wait for the mic, please? Said no one ever to me before. To what extent have you encountered resistance from schools, not just high schools, but colleges, given the climate that we're operating in? Have you had battles where schools have, said we're not going to allow this kind of thing in our school?
We haven't encountered that yet. We have, and since the 60 Minutes interview, we actually have added about 50 schools. So I do feel like there are schools that are continuing to subscribe to the service. So we haven't encountered that yet, but it's certainly, as one of the things we have been looking to expand is also making our content available in public schools. And that's something where we're worried about whether that's going to happen.
Schools would be the front and center. I was wondering also whether there might be a backlash and whether that schools might see what's going on and say, we really need to bring these stories front and center.
We have seen that, and we have certainly seen an increase in interest thanks to, we have an education advisory committee, which is actually headed by Evelyn Higginbotham of Harvard University, and we've really been focused on having schools develop more curriculum, using the content, because that is really what is critical to expanding the use of the archive. We also now have student ambassadors at schools who teach other students about how to use it and how to use it as a resource.
Josh? Reverend Josh Hostler.
Yes.
It's on.
Oh, okay. Okay. I am from the Diocese of Olympia, and I'm thinking of a specific...
Hold on.
Hello? Yeah, it's not on. It's not on. Okay, let me try again. There we go. Checking that. Hello, there we go. Okay. I'm from the Diocese of Olympia. I'm thinking of a specific 92-year-old African-American man in my congregation who definitely has stories to tell. How do I sign him up?
Well, you can do it through our website, or you can reach out to Riley, who will connect you to me.
Perfect. Okay, I will do that.
That is a way to do that.
All right.
And we are, that is one of the more, you would think that it would be something really easy to do, but it's actually one of the more challenging aspects of what we do is identifying people to interview. And that's the main purpose. We have advisory committees in a number of areas who develop lists of people for us to identify to interview. And so it would be very helpful if anybody wanted to submit suggestions to us.
How expensive is it?
Well, it's about, to do the entire interview and digitize it is about $6,000. And the reason is it's not that, well, first of all, we have a team, typically, like, we'll go they'll come to Washington, and in Washington, they'll be here for a week, and maybe they'll do, 15 interviews during that week. So you have all the expense related to that. But in addition, we transcribe every interview. So we have a written transcript. We ask people to bring documents, photographs, other family documents, which we then also photograph and put with the interview, and then the process of actually digitizing the interview and making it searchable.
And then there are people who have been interviewed for HistoryMakers interview some years ago, and that it's time to double back and get a more recent story. Ralph Everett back there gave an interview long before he became head of the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies, and then subsequent to that, Julieanna came back to refresh the interview.
Yeah, there are a lot of people, obviously, Barack Obama, Valerie Jarrett, and we have had, I see people, and so we have been going back and doing interviews of people, because particularly people that that have had, significant accomplishments since their original interview. Jeff?
Seems to me one of the critical things is getting this out into schools and educating teachers about its availability. And one of the things Tony, I know you used to be on the board of Colonial Williamsburg. We are in the process at Colonial Williamsburg of building out history.org to train all the social studies teachers, history teachers in the high schools across the country. And a lot of groups are coming to us to get their content on there. Obviously, we need to connect the HistoryMakers with history.org.
That is actually a great idea.
So I will work on that and get back to you.
Thank you.
And then more broadly, I know there are other groups like that, like iCivics, which is another group that is intent on teaching democracy and true American history in high schools. So there need to be linkages with those. But those pipelines already exist. Seems to me we just need to get the HistoryMakers into those pipelines.
Yeah, those are great ideas, and we would appreciate connections.
I want to follow up.
There's a question over here, too.
Oh, okay. Well, while you're getting that, I want to follow up. Josh, the man in your parish is African American? Well, he should call us and be a part of our collection as well.
Right.
How do you decide who is a history maker as opposed to not a history maker?
Well, as I said, in most areas, science, education, civics, we have advisory committees. People submit names and we go through it. But we do have the criteria that Julieanna identified, which are people who have made some contribution to American life, I think would be the primary. I mean, obviously, we can't interview everybody, but, one of the things is oftentimes we have trouble convincing people to be interviewed. And so that has been a challenge for us in some instances, is making people understand, well, they're like, I'm going to write a book. Or, people in the movie industry, well, maybe they're going to make a movie about me. Our argument is that they're not mutually exclusive. Right, because what we're doing is really an archival interview. We have a set of questions that we ask everybody. Most of the interviews are 2 to 4 hours, but many of them are much longer than that. And so it's much more detailed. But, we do make the point that it's not mutually exclusive. So sometimes we actually need to convince people. And we've had people where it's taken us years to convince them to be interviewed.
I understand that syndrome. I have the same problem with the AAHC. Where's Reverend Harold Cobb? Anyway, if you go to the web, when Julieanna talked about Crite, and we have the collection. I learned more about Alan Crite from going to the HistoryMakers than with any other source of information. And it is so user-friendly. You can go down and actually find key sentences or key terms with a reference of time to the interview. You can go right to the statement. And Crite is really rather something. Okay. Aaron, you have a question?
Yes, I do. First of all, I noticed that you were talking about how you used AI technology to enhance the capabilities of the collection. So I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about that, and then also how you are protecting the content, because in this day and age we have, you know, deep fake technology and all that sort of stuff, and so if we begin to kind of expand where the content is, there's more possibility for it to be altered, and so.
Well, you're rapidly exceeding my area of expertise as chair of the board. But what I can say are two things. One is that, you know, we have had a long partnership with Carnegie Mellon University, and they provided us, they actually created the digital interface that we use. And obviously, we work with them. We have, you know, additional digital expertise internally. We're constantly upgrading, and like all companies and organizations, we're taking all the steps, you know, that we can to protect the content. You know, as far as the intellectual property, you know, we do license it. We do own the content, and we license it to other organizations. But really, Carnegie Mellon has been our true digital partner in helping us address all of those issues.
And the person who gives the interview can put restrictions on the use of the information. I don't know whether you don't allow that, but we have, you know, in our archive, I was showing some of the people this morning on the tour, the papers of a person who some of them knew, and on the box where the papers are, it says restricted. So when the agreement is entered into with the interviewee or the donor, they have the opportunity to put restrictions on it or have none, or some. Any other questions? Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, and I would urge everybody to subscribe to the History Makers.
Absolutely. Okay, we're going to take a short break. What time do we start again? I'm wondering if we can start a little, but all right. Maybe we can start a little earlier. But in any event, that we're here, the next panel starts at 3. And the library is open, and the collection, there's an open house. Oh, we don't have a lot of time. Wait until 5. Okay, all right. Thank you.